This is Franchise Today, brought to you by FRM Solutions, providers of the best-in-class software solutions for franchise relationship management. Franchise Today is your destination for weekly information, conversations, and interviews with accomplished industry leaders, all of whom share best practices for sustainable growth and sensible franchising. Here now, your host, Stan Friedman, to kick off this week's podcast.
Today is Wednesday, October 9th. 2024. I'm Stan Friedman, and this is Franchise Today. Well, it's been just a week since we talked last about Hurricane Helene, and heads up, Florida, just a week later, another Cat 5 is staring you in the face. Batten down the hatches. Here comes Milton. My buddy, Graham Chapman, always refers to Q4 as silly season, referring to the frequency of franchising events and conferences that take place fourth quarter every year. Well, it seems like silly season might be extended a bit as an applicable term, applying to this year's weather in Q4 as well, as Milton is fast approaching, and believe it or not, yet another storm is already spinning up in the Caribbean behind it. So, to all my Florida franchise fam, I say this: please be safe and know that our collective prayers are with you. Now, just ahead of introducing you to Charles Watson, CEO of Tropical Smoothie Cafes, I want to thank last week's guest, Stephanie Johnson, Vice President of Marketing for Alpha Graphics and sister brands, Postnet and World Options, for her stellar performance right here on Franchise Today. I thoroughly enjoyed our conversation, Stephanie, and I hope you did as well. Let me also remind you to pay a visit to www.franchisetodaypodcast.com, where you can drop me a line, make guest recommendations, and of course, leave reviews, letting others know how much you enjoy Franchise Today. It'll mean a great deal to me, so thanks in advance for doing so. Okay, a quick time out here, and when I return in 2 minutes or less, I'll be joined by Charles Watson, a friend, a peer, a member of my franchise fam, and CEO at Tropical Smoothie Cafes. Stay right there. We're coming right back.
Franchise Today will be right back, but first, a word from our sponsors.
We are all familiar with Vistage, YPO, and EO. Well, now comes Zor Forum, a somewhat similar type of executive group, but this one comes with a twist. Zor Forum groups are exclusively for franchisors. Imagine a peer group for sharing and networking on a platform built exclusively for franchise executives. Zor Forum members are afforded unparalleled access to best practices and some of the brightest minds within the franchising world, through regular meetings and a dedicated communications platform. In this post-COVID world, a franchise-specific mastermind or peer group is an endeavor worth making time for. Zor Forum groups of 6 to 10 will bring leaders together that are in similar situations, but with exclusivity in terms of their competitive set, so that each can openly help others benefit from their respective knowledge, perspective, and experience with no fear of competitive loss. Network, learn, strategize, and remain motivated along your journey. Join a peer group, not just any peer group. Join the only one designed for emerging franchisors. Join Zor Forum. Learn more at zorforum.com. That's www.zorforum.com. Charles Watson joined Tropical Smoothie Cafes in 2010 as VP of Franchise Development and was elevated to Chief Development Officer in 2015, following his personal responsibility for awarding more than 800 franchises during his tenure. And in 2018, Charles went on to be elevated to CEO. A veteran hospitality pro, Charles Watson has worked for several hospitality-related companies, including Wyndham Hotels and Resorts, Intercontinental Hotels Group, U.S. Franchise System, and Hospitality Real Estate Counselors. A graduate of the hotel school at Cornell University, Charles also holds a master's in business from the Terry School of Business at the University of Georgia. Charles Watson, welcome to Franchise Today.
Thanks, Stan. It's a pleasure to be here.
Actually, I should say welcome back to Franchise Today, because we've done this once before.
We have indeed. And it was such a stimulating conversation that I just have been waiting around with bated breath to do it again.
All right. Well, it's good to see that certain things about Charles haven't changed over time. He's still got that sense of humor.
Yes. Well, you're an old friend, as you know, so I can throw that out there.
We go back, I think, 14 or 15 years? I mean, how long have you been at Tropical Smoothie? Because I think that's the only place I've known you.
Yeah, I've been here about 15 years, so that sounds about right.
Well, and a lot of good times served on the Southeast Franchise Forum board together, and of course, always at IFA events. Charles, we're going to take what we think we know about each other, right? I just learned a little bit earlier today that you were in the hotel world. We once actually worked for the same company, but that's a story that will get told along the way. Take us back. How did franchising discover Charles Watson?
I am in such agreement with your usual stance here that franchising finds people, people don't find franchising. And I would say, you're right. I was in hotels, and my first job was actually with a company called U.S. Franchise Systems that was the franchisor of Microtel Inn & Suites, America's Best Inns, and Hawthorne Suites. And they needed a young Turk right out of college to go sell franchises up in New England. And I was just smart enough to get that job. So I was up running around from Maine to Connecticut, selling franchises in my first job, and understanding and learning about both the franchise development process, real estate, design and construction, and, good old fashioned knocking on door sales as well. So that was how franchising found me. And I have never done anything else in my career other than franchising. So I've gone from hotels for about a decade into restaurants, obviously, but I have been a franchise guy all the way, and am now a proud member of the IFA board, and just a huge proponent of the business model for this country. I just think it's such a catalyst for growth and for entrepreneurship. So I'm proud to say I'm a lifer.
So the kind of franchise sales you did in the hotel world were what we'd call conversion sales, correct?
Mostly conversion sales. Microtel Inns and Suites was a new construction brand. And so those sales were about, finding the right piece of land, et cetera, and doing the ground up development. But yes, conversion sales. So from a Days Inn to an America's Best Inn, or a Radisson to a Sheraton, or whatever it may be. So you're exactly right. Conversion sales.
I always think that people who have that kind of background in Fran Dev really have the quintessential experience, because unlike the kinds of development that we do in restaurants or in other aspects of mainstream franchising where we pay to generate leads, right? We find people that way. In conversion sales, we knew who our targets were. We had to go convince them that they wanted something that they didn't want, but it was a different kind of selling, wasn't it?
It was, for sure. And a lot more shoe leather is what I would say, right? I mean, I know in that position, you're traveling a lot, you're trying to get in front of people, leaving notes. It was a little bit of a different time, a little bit less technology, but there's something that's also great about that. When we get the opportunity to do that, when you're at the multi-unit show or you're at the IFA show and you have the opportunity to get face to face and speak with clients about your brand and selling your wares, that is, I think, the most special part of franchise development is being able to do that. And we don't get to do that as much anymore, right? There's so much over the phone and on webinars and all that kind of stuff. So it's nice to be able to get face to face with people. And you're right, conversion sales, that's what you're doing 100%.
So walk us through some of the milestones of the hotel side of your career, and where was the pivot then that took you from doing it to getting into the food side with restaurants?
Sure. So I'm a proud graduate of the hotel school at Cornell University up in New York. And as you know, I'm born and raised in Atlanta. So after 4 years of snow in upstate New York and another year or two of snow in Boston, after U.S. Franchise Systems, I said, I'd like to come back to Atlanta. There's one thing about rain, and that's that you don't have to shovel it. And so I was happy to come back to Atlanta and get away from that snow. And I took a job after U.S. Franchise Systems with IHG, Intercontinental Hotels Group, which was the old Bass Hotels and Resorts Group at that time, and took a job. I wanted to go and see what a big franchising organization looked like, right? I mean, I think IHG is up to almost 30 brands now. They're very much like a Wyndham in terms of the number of brands. The proliferation of brands under the different hotel major flags is absolutely crazy from the time when you and I were doing it, right? Wyndham was really kind of the first to do that, or Cendant Corp. And you've seen IHG, Hyatt, Hilton, Marriott all follow suit in terms of having huge portfolios of brands. But I digress. So I wanted to work for a big company after having been with a smaller company. And so I went to IHG and I did strategic services. And strategic services, you would say, what was strategic about it? We were doing a lot of work around, this is when the internet and websites and everything were really starting to take off. So I did a lot of strategic e-commerce type of work for about 3, maybe 4 years. And then I moved over. My heart drugged me back into sales. And I did my last year at IHG in global sales before coming back to restaurants. And I came back to restaurants through a gentleman by the name of Scott Presley, who was one of the founding members of the Rourke Capital Group. He had also been with U.S. Franchise Systems, where I had been. And he told me about a little brand he knew down in Destin, Florida, that he was working with. And did I have any interest in doing some franchise development for it? And what was interesting about that, Stan, is ultimately that I come from restaurants. My father was in the restaurant business his entire life, his entire career. And so I grew up waiting tables and washing dishes and all that kind of stuff. That's a big part of my story as well. So when I left college and went into hotels, I went, man, I'm not going to go do what my dad did. That looks hard. And I went into hotels, and then it found me. It found me again. And I've been at Tropical Smoothie Cafe ever since then. And so glad that I've had the opportunity to help build this brand and to inspire better, which is our vision across the United States.
You evoked the name Presley.
Yeah.
I made a New Year's resolution about 4 years ago during COVID. I lost a couple of friends back then, and I made a resolution that if a name popped in a conversation or came across my line of sight of somebody that I've not been in touch with for some time, I would give myself 24 hours to either drop an email or leave a voicemail or actually connect on a phone call if possible, so as not to run the risk of the next time I try to find that person discovering, well, they're no longer with us, which is what happened a lot during COVID.
Right.
So now you've evoked the name of Presley today, and I'm sitting here realizing how long it's been since I've said hello to Scott, and I've got to add a name to my call list today. Thank you, Charles. You did something else, too, that kind of flashed across my mind's eye as a memory, but you have to give the credit where it's due. When you look at all the roll-ups and consolidations that are happening in the franchise world today, IHG and Ascendant were some of the first to do that, to start gobbling up market segments and putting them under umbrellas, weren't they?
Yeah, they really were gobbling up market segments for sure. And then also, I think what you've seen in hotels as a distant viewer of it now is creating new segments, right? It never ends. Well, this is limited service, casual, up mid-scale, blah, blah, right? I mean, they're coming up with anything they can. Extended stay, mid-tier, blah, 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 blah. But the proliferation of brands, if you travel a lot, which I know a lot of your listeners probably do in franchising, there's a lot of hotel brands. And so it always makes me wonder, is there another Hampton Inn out there, right? Is there another great brand? Just like we talk about in restaurants, right? Can the country sustain in the restaurant space another McDonald's or another Subway? I think it's the same with hotels, right? There's so many brands does that become a regional hub or a regional play as well? Probably not. It probably stays national to international, but there's a lot of brands out there that don't have a ton of locations, is my point.
Well, and I think that we have a consumer marketplace that's very fickle, too. I mean, you look at the treateries in the dessert segment and how many brands are being born by the day of the week, much less the month or the quarter.
Right.
And putting the word sustainable in front of growth comes into play there, doesn't it?
It does.
They can't all make it.
It's not possible. That's correct. It's not possible. And I do have a theory. I mean, when you see people rush into a crowd, right? When you see a Nothing Bundt Cakes taking off, or you see a Crumble cookies taken off, it's going to pop off other people that go, my grandmother's cookie recipe is amazing and I have 3 units and I'm going to go do what they do. And, it ultimately gets down to, as you said, sustainable development and what brands have the knowledge and know-how to move quickly and still keep the modicum of quality that they need in order to be able to do that, right? Because as you and I both know, there's no shortage of Americans looking to live the American dream and be entrepreneurs. And our job as folks in franchising is ultimately to make sure that they get a fair shake and that they get to see franchise disclosure documents and item 19s and item 7s so that they can make an informed business decision around that. And I think that's something you and I both agree on and have fought for through the years, because again, franchising is the greatest engine for entrepreneurship in the United States, in my opinion. And we got to make sure that franchisees can make good choices. That's not to say that buying a startup franchise in the treats segment or any other is a bad idea, because you may just be passionate about it, but it's good for franchise buyers to be super informed.
All right. So Charles, let's go back to the beginning years of your career at Tropical Smoothie Cafe, which has proven to be one of those brands that without a doubt at this point has put the word sustainable in front of growth. Your career there began in FranDev before you became CEO. Why don't you walk us through some of the milestones that led to the current day.
Sure. It'd be a pleasure to. As I said, I've been with Tropical Smoothie Cafe for about 15 years now. I started in January of 2010 as our vice president of franchise development. At that time, the business was still located in Destin, Florida, which is a hot vacation spot for a lot of people in the Southeast and Texas. So a lot of people know Destin, Florida, beautiful beaches, etc. So I was driving back and forth from Atlanta to Destin and, working 3-4 days a week in the office and traveling back and forth to Atlanta and really getting the foundation set for sustainable franchise growth, right? There's tools and resources that you need in order to be able to do that. And I was lucky enough to get investment from the founders, Eric Jenrich and David Walker, as well as the PE sponsor, Scott Presley, to be able to put in place the things that were needed in order to continue to, or really to begin to drive real franchise sales growth. And 2010, 2011, 2012 were not blowing the doors off, so to speak, but my counterpart on the COO side was a guy by the name of Mike Rotundo, and he did a great job continuing to drive AUV and continuing to make the business more attractive from a franchise perspective. Mike went on to be the CEO previous to me, but I started as development guy and he started as operations guy, and then we both kind of matriculated up. And, I think the biggest milestone that is kind of a funny story would be after my first year in 2010, we sold 17 franchises, and I was back in Atlanta, and the private equity partner, Scott, was here, and we went out to lunch, and I said, Scott, you don't have to say anything. I understand. We only did 17 deals. I know you probably have to let me go. You have to fire me. And his response was, I'm surprised you sold 17 deals. Now, why is that funny? Why did he say that? He said that because the AUV and the development costs and thus the investment ratio was not in a great place, right? The only people that were going to buy this franchise were people that were really passionate about it, that loved it so much that they weren't looking at item 7 and item 19. They just wanted to be Tropical Smoothie Cafe franchisees. And that's something I think is really interesting, Stan, to think about is what brands have that, because you don't typically come out of the box with a 2-to-1 or a 3-to-1 sales to investment ratio, but there are franchisees that really understand that this brand has something to it. And so if you could take that and bottle it, you'd be in a great place. Other big milestone, I think, was moving the company from Destin to Atlanta. We did that at the end of 2012. The ability to move to Atlanta to be able to better service our franchisees, obviously a bigger airport to fly out of. And so I think that was a big part. We got our Tropical Franchisee Council going at that time. It had under a different name at that point, but really getting franchisee involvement as we continued to grow, franchisee involvement in how the business was going. By 2014, I turned into the chief development officer, where I was able to take over construction as well as real estate and franchise administration. So that was fantastic to be able to take on some other additional areas of the business. And again, the brand is continuing to grow and continuing to grow. And we're continuing to add people here at the Atlanta Support Center. And then halfway through 2018, I was the interim CEO for Tropical Smoothie for the second half of 2018. And then in December of 2018, I became the full-time CEO. So those were kind of my milestones at Tropical Smoothie.
And a great run you've had doing all of the above and doing it under various different ownership groups. And we'll talk about a little bit of that when we come back from a break. But you just gave me yet another fond memory to draw on, which is another place that you and I have some nexus, and that is with Eric Jenrich, who I guess in his early days of Tropical Smoothie, he was also flying the flag that I was selling, which was Blimpie International, Blimpie Subs and Salad. So I had a little bit of history with Eric Jenrich as well. It's funny how with 3 degrees of separation, we got a little conversation going. We could probably get to 8 or 10 or a dozen more names that we have things in common with. We just need to do it more often, Charles.
That's true. And, just to add, Eric Jenrich and his business partner, David Walker, Eric was a Blimpie Subs and Salads franchisee, and David was a Subway franchisee. So both of those guys, they ran across a guy in Destin that was doing all natural real fruit smoothies. And they said, man, I'd love to drive more sales at Blimpie, love to drive more sales at Subway. And, this is early 90s, right? Where smoothies are still relatively new. Both of those guys approached both of those brands to do smoothies. Neither brand wanted to. And then again, this is when the cool American dream story comes in. They said, okay, fine, we'll start our own brand with it. And obviously they've had an amazing amount of success even to this day. They are still invested in Tropical Smoothie Cafe and have been under BIP and 10 Point Capital, which was our first private equity sponsor. They were invested under LLCP, Levine Leichman Capital Partners. And as you well know, we were just sold about 120 days ago to Blackstone. Still they're still a part of working with their baby. So it's great to have Eric and David along for the ride.
But it's a testament to the word sustainable appearing in front of the word growth at Tropical Smoothie Cafe that you've come from a place where it was an entrepreneur's baby and his dream all the way to Blackstone. That kind of says a little bit more than, maybe this would be a good brand.
Yes, I would agree with that. I appreciate that and agree with it.
We're talking today with Charles Watson, CEO at Tropical Smoothie Cafe. We're going to take a quick break here on Franchise Today. I'm Stan Friedman. Don't go away. We're coming right back.
Franchise Today will be right back. But first, a word from our sponsors.
Franchise Today is brought to you by FRM Solutions, offering the only CRM tool built exclusively for franchising that lets you have it your way. Whether you're a single brand needing professional tools across departments or a portfolio of brands needing franchise-specific CRM across the enterprise. Either way, FRM satisfies the needs of many with the power of one. That's right, one single instance of FRM is all it takes across departments or across brands. So if you've had it with inflexible, one-size-fits-all CRM, end your frustration today. FRM offers robust dashboarding, tailored reporting, and with open APIs, FRM pushes, pulls, and integrates with other databases, providing you with a single source of truth. Don't just take my word for it. Visit them at frmsolutions.com and order up a demo today. And we are back with Tropical Smoothie Cafe CEO Charles Watson joining us today. Charles, we laid down quite a foundation in that first half of our conversation. But what we're going to do from here forward is go forward and talk about the present day and what you see ahead. Let's start with a 1 to 3 and maybe even a 5-year horizon. Franchising in general, not so much just Tropical Smoothie. Where are we today, Charles, in the world as we see it with a lot of changes that have been occurring in the government relations world over the last quarter? What are you seeing as we look ahead?
Goodness. Well, let me dust off my crystal ball here so I can tell everyone exactly what's going to happen. I think for franchising in general, I think we're status quo in terms of we're going to have to continue fighting the good fight, right, on Capitol Hill and some of the not so business friendly policies that are out there. But we have done a great job. Matt Holler's done a great job at IFA. So to me, Stan, I think we keep fighting the good fight and I think we keep holding our ground. I don't see major movement one way or the other. I think we're at stasis. And I think with the House and the Senate and the presidential election, I think that where I think that's going to end up is in gridlock as well. And so I think it'll be our normal fight. So I think franchising is pretty well safe for right now. We'll have to keep working hard at it. In terms of from an economic cycle perspective, I mean, all the talk is, are we actually going to execute this soft landing? And there are certainly plenty of indications that we might. I tend to be a glass half empty kind of guy when talking about the economy. I always want to prepare for the worst and hope for the best, so to speak. So I think in restaurants and everything that I'm reading, I think we're looking at a lower growth environment for sure. I think transactions are still going to be incredibly difficult to get the rest of this year and into 2025. And it's kind of down economic times, I would say. I would not say super far down, but down just a little bit, that allows great brands to actually take share and to take stride. And that's what we're hoping to do. We, like everybody else, have battled through the last couple of years. We've had good results, but not great results from the way that I look at it. Now, I, of course, have pretty high standards for the brand. I shouldn't be in this chair if I didn't, but I believe things are going to be, they're going to be a B-, Stan. That's what I think. I think altogether we're going to be about a B-. And I think those brands that have great relationships with their franchisees and great relationships with their guests and that are really connecting with them will continue to see growth going forward. But I don't see the economy crashes, everybody gets laid off, and now we talk about people are taking packages and buying a ton of franchises. That whole cycle that you and I know so well, I don't see that kicking off in 2025. I'd love your take, Stan. What do you think?
I think the government relations side of the business can take a deep breath and give a sigh of relief over the joint employer issues, but I don't think that those are really necessarily gone. I think they're gone maybe at the federal level for a while, but the states are still going to be barking and making noise. California will lead that charge forever, and there will be others. I think, too, the disclosure law issues and the brokerage community issues are things that we still have to hold our breath and see how all that shakes out. There's an awful lot going on that side of the business.
Certainly, when you talk about this topic, it's always hard, right? Because there's franchisors that use brokers, and there's a place for brokers, et cetera. I haven't used brokers in 14 years, 15 years, something like that. So I'm of the belief that if you own a brand, you should sell it yourself. That's my honest opinion. You should find a way to do it. But I do believe that given what I know about brokers and that the stable of brands that they're selling is only the stable of people that they're currently working with that they can make money on, which makes complete sense, right? I think it should be disclosed what brands a broker is actually representing. If that's one, if that's 25, or if that's 100, I think the prospect needs to know that. And I think that's a pretty gray area.
Couldn't agree with you more. I think it follows a lot of the old days of residential real estate and disclosure laws as to who represents who and who's getting paid by who. And you put that out in the light of day and everything should be fine if you're doing it the right way, correct?
I agree 100%.
What about on the labor side? You're in a labor-intense business with frontline employees. How has all that been shaking out for you of late?
Well, obviously, labor from 22 forward has been just probably the biggest nightmare that we've dealt with, or that our franchisees have dealt with. And we are absolutely seeing some relief. We are seeing more people applying for jobs. Obviously, the unemployment rate is going up a little bit. And there is that fine balance of if you get 0% unemployment, then you're in the situation where restaurants have been a couple years ago. So we're seeing some great relief there, the ability to really reload and really get some great employees at our cafes, and our franchisees are taking advantage of that to be able to do it. So we're feeling good about the labor environment right now.
What about the changes since COVID and technology and marketing, and the world is moving at a much quicker pace? I think technology was already clipping along at a fairly hefty pace before COVID. Post-COVID, it seems like you can't keep up with it. There are changes that are occurring on a daily basis. What kind of impact does that have on your business?
Well, I have to start by saying I get to see this at home every day. I've got an 11-year-old and an 9-year-old, and they get in trouble these days around their iPads and what they're doing with their iPads, right? It's a whole new world. But no, I agree with you. And for Tropical Smoothie, one of the pillars that we have is really making sure that we're leading in terms of digital guest experience, right? And digital guest experience, that sounds great. What does that mean? That's ultimately the ways that we're in touch with our guests via technology, right? And so that's not just social media, that's our app, that's our website, and it is a monster piece of the business. And guess what? Every one of those things that we're doing from a technology perspective has fees and costs associated with it. And I think that's one of the things that doesn't get talked about as much, especially for franchisees, is the impact of additional fees that are coming down the road in channels that we have to participate in, whether that's third party or the branded proprietary app, catering apps, et cetera. They all come at a cost, right? And these are all things that if you've been in the restaurant business for 15 years, if you've been in quick casual or QSR for 15 years, there was a time and place where these things didn't exist and these fees were not there. So they're cutting into margins to some degree, and franchisees continue to have a hard time with those additional costs. From our side, we believe any additional sales channel is a great sales channel. We have to manage the cost of that sales channel, and we have to understand that sales channels are going to have different cost structures associated with them. So our job is to work with our franchisees to make sure that we really have agreement on what sales channels make sense at what pricing and how we drive forward with those different channels. But we got a lot of folks here at the support center in Atlanta that are working on our digital guest experience. And so at the corporate offices of various franchisors, there's a lot of investment being made as well, because it has to be. You have to be on the shelf, as we used to say.
What percentage of your business is retail versus catering?
We believe catering is a huge opportunity for our business. We're less than 1% catering. What I think is interesting that is a good stat is we're almost 40% digital. So we have work to do from a catering perspective, but we are higher than the average restaurant from a convenience perspective, which is how we view the digital channels, be they proprietary or third party.
What about the benevolence side of franchising? I know you're a big proponent of franchising gives back. You're sitting on the IFA board. What does Tropical Smoothie Cafe do at the corporate level, or do you have franchisees participating in that at a unit level on their own?
So we do. We are in partnership with No Kid Hungry, and we're actually executing right now our CEO challenge, which I worked with No Kid Hungry to come up with, which was challenging other restaurant CEOs to get involved with No Kid Hungry and to raise some dollars. I know we're just past summer, but the campaign that we just completed was around ending childhood hunger in general, but then also during the summer. There's so many kids that don't get full meals and don't have meals because they're not going to school, right? And so that was a big thing that we did from a No Kid Hungry perspective that I got involved with. As a brand supporting No Kid Hungry, we'll probably raise about $2.5 million. I'm hopeful we get there. Might be a little aggressive, but No Kid Hungry is a great great partner. And we do in-cafe activation that we did about 5 months ago where the franchisees are able to take donations. We do a roundup, and we also have a smoothie on the menu where a portion of the proceeds go to No Kid. We put $1 of the proceeds that go towards No Kid Hungry. And so that's how we're raising those funds. And we believe it's a great partnership fit for us. And there's lots of other great restaurant brands in there. I tell you what, we all compete on a daily basis, but one thing we can agree on is there's no reason for kids in the United States of America to go hungry. We just have too much bounty and too much wealth. And we're very proud to be a partner with No Kid Hungry to be able to end childhood hunger.
Could not agree with you more there either, Charles. It seems like great minds just continue to think alike.
I tell you what, I learned from the best, Stan. I learned from the best.
What about something I haven't asked you today, Charles, that you wished I would have? Is there anything that you can think of?
Oh, goodness. I think what you're going to see in the industry going forward is just continued innovation across the board. Everyone is competing so hard right now, right? In a down transactions environment, you know this, everybody starts really scratching and clawing. And that has to come, especially with restaurants, through innovation. So I think we're going to see over the next 36 months, I think we're going to see a ton of innovation. I think we're going to see brands shifting what they're doing to make sure that they're on their target customer and that they're providing them with the products and services that they want in real time. We finally have shaken through COVID, and it's like, okay, we're back to real restaurant world where there's no major change happening. We need to just get back to the business of being in restaurants. And I think there's a lot of my colleagues, including myself, that would like to be doing better. And so the way to drive that is through innovation. So I think you're going to see some neat stuff out of the restaurant industry going forward. I know we have some big plans from a menu perspective, and so I look forward to launching that and getting that out to our guests to try.
My last question before I ask you for contact info has to do with something we touched on a little earlier with all the consolidation and new market segment categories. What are your thoughts around the idea that founder-led brands are becoming fewer and further between as private equity continues to gobble up the franchise world? What do you see there culturally as a risk versus reward? What are your thoughts on that? How do you come down on that?
Well, Tropical Smoothie Cafe is literally the perfect example, as you said, of founder-led brand, 2 major transactions, probably going into a third at some point, right? At some point, any private equity firm is going to want to get their reversion on their investment. We're a perfect example of small to big, and we've gone through all stages of private equity. And I am a proponent of private equity. I think private equity is ultimately good for franchising because they're very focused on, of course, making a profit, but also doing it in the right way in terms of when you talk about sustainable franchising. I don't know a lot of PE groups that are like, let's go break all the rules and sell a bunch of franchises, right? That hasn't been my experience at all. And I see them bringing in talented executives to different companies to run them and run them well in a sustainable manner. So I'm pro that. I think that you're going to see more of it. I also believe, Stan, private equity firms aren't going to go start the next great concept. It's always going to be mom and pop or founders of brands that come up with something and they drive their passion and they open 2 or 3 of them. I think the difference is that private equity is going so much further down the line into 3 units, 5 units, 10 units, 15 units. There's people that play in that space that want to get it up to 25 units or 50 units or 100 units. So I think like anything else that's had success, I think you're going to see continued kind of slice and dice, so to speak, of those private equity firms and what stage they play at. You know, you may start seeing players that play at 10 to 25 or 10 to 50, where you used to not really have players until you hit 100 or 250 units. That's my take.
What about their entry now into the multi-unit operator side of the business? As a franchisor, there are some that are okay with it, but most of the CEOs I talk to don't care much for that thought. And what about you?
We have been a non-private equity shop thus far on the franchisee side. I would tell you I am open to looking at it, but it's going to come with really good discussions and possibly some legalese that goes along with that, because we just want to make sure that the tail isn't wagging the dog, and that to be able to work within a 5 to 7 year time horizon, that we're completely aligned going in terms of what our roles and responsibilities will be on the PE multi-unit side and on the franchisor side, because it's not inherently a bad thing. We just both need to understand what we're both trying to do, what our end goals are, and how can we align those two things so that we can have a great partnership. So not something I've done thus far, but something we are considering. So we'll keep you informed on that.
All right. Film at 11, as they would say in TV news.
Yeah.
What about some contact info so that those who have had a taste and a glimpse of what you're up to over there these days, Charles, can find you again?
Yeah, sure. Best way to get in touch with me is via email. It is cwatson@tropicalsmoothie.com.
Easy peasy. Charles, can't thank you enough for making the time to come back around and give us an update on what's going on in your world. We'll keep an eye on the future together. And thank you again for your service to the board at the IFA and for all that you do in franchising above and beyond the four walls at Tropical Smoothie.
Well, that's a ditto to you as well, Stan. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Charles Watson, CEO of Tropical Smoothie Cafe. Thanks for joining us on Franchise Today. Well, that's a wrap for today, but there's plenty more in the weeks ahead, including Donato's Pizza's Kevin King, Evive Brands CEO Ryan Parsons, and more, much, much more. Remember to subscribe to Franchise Today wherever you chase podcasts, and I'll see you right back here next week. Until then, I'm Stan Friedman, wishing you the best, the very best of all things franchising, and Franchise Today is out.
Franchise Today is a production of FRM Solutions, providing best-in-class CRM tools to empower relationships with prospective and existing franchisees. Find them online at frmsolutions.com. Join Stan every Wednesday at noon Eastern for another episode of Franchise Today.
When you're part of a military family, you understand sacrifice and support. At American Public University, we honor your dedication by extending our military tuition savings to your extended family. Parents, spouses, legal partners, siblings, and dependents all qualify for APU's preferred military rate of just $250 per credit hour for undergraduate and master's level programs. American Public University. Value for the whole family. Learn more at apu.apus.edu/military.